Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to join us. You know, folks, on the way into the studio this morning, I got to thinking, how would it be that we could take two statements put out by two prominent people whose policies are still in effect today and have basically been, besides Zbigniew Brzezinski, statements about these two gentlemen that you could say is the game plan, the modus operandi for the bankers that are bleeding our country and our world. And for those of you who are watching the program for the first time, you're probably wondering, what is this guy talking about? Well, what I'm talking about, my friends, and I'll start right at the very beginning, is that the Federal Reserve is a private foreign bank. Now, I know if you've been watching this program for years, that you're already aware of this. And I'm sure you've done your own research and you have this understanding. You have this understanding exactly what I just said, is that the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with the federal government. It was, the actual name was put in deceitfully by a fellow by the name of Paul Warburg out of Germany. And basically he said, when you read the book, The Creature from the Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffith's book, which does a wonderful job, I highly recommend this book. Not that I'm selling it, but for if you really want to get a good historical base and understanding of what I'm speaking of. Basically, he said, we know we want the people to believe that this private cartel, banking cartel, is going to be part of the federal government. And the other thing was, they knew they were going to confiscate all the intrinsic wealth of the people, particularly their property. The gold and the silver, so forth, that at that time backed up a dollar, because if you've been watching this program, you understand that a dollar is 25.8 grains of gold and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver by the coinage acts of this country. Well, my friends, you no longer have dollars. The thing that you base your life on, that is in your pocket, that you sweat for every day, that you worry about every evening, is an instrument of debt. Federal Reserve note. What is a note? It is an acknowledgement of debt. And this is why there's two signatories on that instrument. One's the creditor, one's the debtor. So I thought about, how is it that I could just take two statements from two people whose, even though these statements are old in the sense of modern time, but their policies are still in effect, and it has been, as I said, the modus operandi for basically the last 100 years, to transfer the true value, the true wealth, the intrinsic value, and the sweat equity of the American people. So I've thought that we would start off with that. And the two names that I came to want to talk to you about basically was one that I have gone over recently, and that is a statement by Edward Mandel House. And he was in a private meeting with President Wilson. Now, you have to understand, my friends, first of all, this statement is in 1912. Okay, the Federal Reserve Act came into play on December 23rd, 1913, literally while the Congress was away for the Christmas break. And you've got to understand, this was done purposely. The Federal Reserve Act was not written in the halls of a representative legislation. No, this was written at a private mansion of J.P. Morgan off the coast of Georgia in a place called Jekyll Island. This is where it was written. Everything was done secretly. And there were two people who were the main liaisons between the international bankers, particularly the House of Rothschild and the Warburgs out of Germany, and the J.P. Morgans here in the United States, and Rockefellers and the chefs and so forth. But the two main liaisons that I thought we would take these quotes from that had to do exactly with this, but the big one was the two main liaisons. Let me back up. I got a little ahead of myself, my apologies. The two big liaisons were literally Senator Aldrich from Rhode Island, who wound up marrying into the Rockefeller family, and you probably have heard the name John Aldrich Rockefeller, or Aldrich Rockefeller. And the other thing is that you've got to understand that he was also very instrumental in, as a liaison with the bankers, along with this Colonel Edward Mandel House. Now, Colonel House was more of a connection, if you would, an unofficial connection, even though this man goes into politics for many, many years at this point. He basically is the controlling factor, the controlling mechanism, the lever, if you would, of President Wilson. President Wilson confided in him and everything, and President Wilson took his advice and everything, and Colonel Edward Mandel House was not looking out for the best interest of the American people. He was looking out for the interests that served him, which were the international bankers. Hence came the Federal Reserve Act. So when we have these two gentlemen working behind the scenes, one really with the bankers and one as leverage with President Wilson, we come up with the Federal Reserve Act. Again, that was written by these bankers in Jekyll Island, Georgia. So now that comes into play, as I said, December 23rd, 1913. Well, in 1912, and I just read this statement to you about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we started to break it down, but unfortunately we ran out of time. I want you to listen to this prediction of fact. And what I mean by that is listen to what Edward Mandel House is saying. He is telling you how, the wheres, the whens, the whys, and the hows that we became subjugated, and we are, to an insolvent corporation, which is the United States government, which is a corporation. And we've gone over this many times in this program, the Organic Act of 1871, where they turned the United States government into a for-profit corporation. And another corporation took over the issuance of its currency, that corporation being the Federal Reserve Act. Well, my friends, it only took a very short duration, from 1913 to 1929, to literally cause such a financial panic, which was orchestrated by these very same bankers, to bring on what you know as the Great Depression. Now, listen to Mr. Mandel House's statement. He is talking in a private meeting with President Woodrow Wilson, and he is telling Mr. Wilson basically flat out the future status, economic status, political status, lawful status of the people. He is saying what they are going to become. He is saying what system of law they are going to use to acquire this. And my friends, you have to ask yourself, we all know, especially people of my generation and older, that at one time we had common law in this country. And common law basically was like this: if you did no harm to another human being or their property, the law basically left you alone. Now, there were some things that were into play, very small, minor things. Believe it or not, in some cities like New York City and some other cities, there were actual fines for speeding with horses within city boundaries, or some cities actually had fines for not picking up dung that was produced by a horse. I mean, little things like that. But think of the quadrum of laws and fees and levies and statutes that plague the American people's liberty today. And this, my friend, is the base of it, because he talks about what law they're going to use and what your standing is going to be in that law. Now, I know 3 or 4 weeks ago that we read this. I didn't get to do all of it with you. So for those of you that were watching 4 weeks ago, please bear with me. But please take heed. Listen to this man's words. He is telling the President of the United States what is in store for you and your children. Okay, let us continue. Edward Mandel House, private meeting, again with President Woodrow Wilson. Very soon, every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people, and that will operate under the ancient system of pledging. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda, which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Every American will be forced to register or suffer being unable to work and earn a living. They will be our chattel, and we will hold the security interest over them forever, by operation of the law merchant under the scheme of secured transactions. A lot said right there. Now this is 1912. He's saying very soon every American will be required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people. Now ask yourself, my friends, think of these words that are jumping out. First of all, very soon. In other words, this is 1912. We're talking next year. Every American. And what is he talking about, every American? I don't want to go too far into that, but don't think that he's just talking about every human being in the country of the United States. He's talking about every 14th Amendment American under the jurisdiction and property of that corporation that was formed in 1871. And we've gone over this a lot of times on this program, my friends, but I'll sum it up for you real quickly. The Civil War had nothing to do with freeing the black people from the private plantations, except for they were the political cause to sell it to the people. They always have to sell the war to the people, whether they create their own crises, whether they allow crises to happen, or whether they come up with a political cause to arouse the people enough. And we've talked about this before, the Hegelian dialectic, that little triangle we've gone over before, okay? You create a crisis, you get the emotional response you want from the people, and the third part of that triangle is the people will accept your authority to do something because of that emotional state you put them in through the original crisis. Look at 9/11. 9/11, Pearl Harbor. What did the Project for the New American Century say, which we read to you some years ago? That they needed a new Pearl Harbor. My friends, can you say 9/11? 9/11 was an inside job. If you don't turn the channel off, that may sound foreign or strange to you. I ask you to do your research. I ask you to who put the thermite there. Do you really think 19 hijackers outsmarted, outwitted, and outmaneuvered the entire intelligence and defense agencies of this country? My friends, there's too many people have come forward, from civilians to people at the Pentagon, military and civilian, to the reporters who showed up at the Pentagon. Jamie McIntyre, CNN News, reporting initially that there was no plane crash at the Pentagon. How do you get a 124-foot, 10-foot wingspan, 10-inch, wingspan into a 16-foot hole? You don't. That's what was at the Pentagon. And I don't have the time to go through all this evidence, but when you look at 9/11, you got William Rodriguez, who was the key keeper for the WTC towers. Go online and punch in William Rodriguez speaks of 9/11. This man knew that buildings better than anybody, except for maybe the architects that built them, because he was the key keeper. He had a key for every room he had the master in that, and that's what he did. He talks about the explosions below his feet, and then after the explosions below his feet, the explosions above. Look at the forensic evidence. Of course, there was never a crime scene at the World Trade Center. Imagine that. Mayor Giuliani, who used to prosecute people as an attorney general of the city of New York, as mayor, did not even have his police department or his attorney general set up a crime scene. How is it that the ships were able to leave India and China 2 to 3 weeks earlier to be in New York on September 13th to pick up the metal and take it away to China? How were the contracts signed earlier? How did they know to leave their ports when they were on the other side of the world 2 and 3 weeks earlier to be in New York? Come on, my friends. It's just too much evidence. Thermite in the building. Professor Jones doing his old private analysis of it, University of Utah, and explaining what the thermite's from. The firefighters, the police, the EMS, the civilians. I mean, there's just too much evidence there. So it's what I'm talking about is they create this crisis. And then they get the emotional response they want from the people. And the two that they always want is primarily fear, but also anger. Boy, if you can mix it with fear and anger, they're really gonna walk for you. And then, of course, the third part of the triangle is you bring in your authority. We have to take your liberties away to keep you safe. We have to go invade 9 different countries and rape them and pillage them and take their natural resources and develop private corporations' profits because of this crisis. And you accepted it because no one did the research. I won't say not anyone did the research. A lot of people did the research. My friends, the rest of the world knows that 9/11 was an inside job. Italian, Russian, German, Austrian, just to name a few that I can think in the top of my head, national officials of them countries have come forward and said so from their own intelligence. So what we're talking about here is when he says the Americans, back to Mr. Mandel House, and I sort of jumped around, back to the Civil War, when they create this crisis, well, they had to sell the Civil War to the American people, and how they did it was the abolitionist movement. They said, listen, we want to free the black man. Well, my friends, all they did was take the black man from the private plantation and put everybody on the federal plantation. It's what they did. It's what the 14th Amendment is about. You are property of an insolvent corporation. Please, if you haven't seen this program before, I invite you to, we did a whole show on this, the Organic Act of 1871. So understand, this is who he's talking about. And then everyone will be required to register. My friends, anything of value, you have to register it. Why? Because when you register something, you are literally giving possession over it to whomever you are registering with. Did you ever wonder why, when an automobile manufacturer sells a car to you, that the true title of that vehicle goes to the state, and then the state gives you a certificate of title? It's because they're allowing you to use something of value. They maintain the value. You can go on the internet and see this document. Ralph Winterow, his site has it, and you can read it verbatim. So when you register something, my friends, you're actually turning over actual possession of it. Yeah, you still get to use it, but it's not yours. Certificate of title literally means it's bare use of. Someone is allowing you to use something of value. Take, for instance, if you're my age, your great-grandfather held for his land a laudial title in his safe. And if I wanted to sell my land, or he wanted to sell his land to you, he would literally sign it over to you, like you would endorsing a check. And you know, it's interesting, I had a young fellow one day, this was some years ago, we were watching the old show Bonanza, and the Cartwrights were doing something with land, and the guy just took it out and he signed it and he gave it to the guy. And this 14-year-old male, this 14-year-old child, he had the understanding of, like, he said, Uncle, he can't do that. Sure, he couldn't do it today because we don't own our land. You got to go register it with the owners. And if you don't think that I am correct, well, then I invite you not to pay your extortion fee that you know is property taxes for 2 years, and you are going to see who literally owns your property. They'll be required to register. Now, the only thing here is we're not required in a lot of things that we do. Because if you look at these different forms that you fill out, it'll say right on it, application. Required to register their biological property in a national system designed to keep track of the people. Biological property. Biological, my friends, life. Life. Biological is life. Property in a national system. And it's designed to keep track of the people. Do you think they've accomplished all that? This is plain English here. What's biological property? Your life, your sweat equity, your labors, your mind, your heart, and thereafter your soul. And will operate under the ancient system of pledging. Now, what is pledging? I know we read this verbatim from the Law Dictionary 4 weeks ago, but basically, my friends, the easiest way for me to put it up for you is this. Let's say that your county, you're back in the War of Independence, and your county has to come up with a certain amount of able-bodied men. And you're a slave owner. And I don't care if it's a Irish slave, a black slave, you are a slave owner. There were people called indentured servants. And a lot of the Irish came over here in that manner. Well, they could actually sign you over as a pledge. And you, for your term of service, whether it was your life or the indentured servant for a certain period of time, was usually between 5 and 7 years, you would go to war for that person who owned you. He pledged you. He pledged your services to whatever endeavor was in need. And that's what he's talking about here. They have created a system now through our ignorance and our apathy and our disbelief, our belief that we cannot do anything, which is wrong. It's a disbelief. But they pledging you. And his biological property that they're pledging, my friends, is your sweat equity that you work for every day. You work every day for an instrument of debt issued by a private, for-profit, foreign banking corporation known as the Federal Reserve. And you still go into debt for every one of these issued, because don't forget, for every one of them dollars, which is not a dollar that you think you have in your pocket, well, actually, my friends, that isn't a debt instrument. There is an interest bond due on that. So for every one you have in your pocket, there's another one owed to cover the debt. So if you print another one to cover the initial debt, what happens? Now the debt doubles, quadruples, and so forth. It's called perpetual debt. This is what he's talking about. By such methodology, we can compel people to submit to our agenda. So don't tell me there is not a true factual conspiracy going on here to get the people to submit to our agenda. This isn't happening by mistake. This is a well thought out process. And you got to ask yourself, who's our? Who is our? You think they're talking about you and I and your neighbor across the street? No, he's talking about the bankers, the people behind the scenes who are manipulating all this. Our agenda. And notice the word submit. And that just goes back, I'm going to sum that up real easy. When this country was founded, the order of superiority or position in this country went God, people, government. And if you want to continue the government, it went local, state, federal. Well, they have completely flipped that around. Now it's federal, state, local, people, and they've done all they can to take God out of your life and under your understanding and your spirituality. This is exactly what he's talking about. And don't think this has all happened by chance. Well, we're not supposed to have God involved with our government. Folks, do your research. You know, people that say that to me, that is a real barometer to me as to how truly ignorant they are of the sacrifices that have been made and what the foundation was of these people who made the sacrifices during the founding era. Congress used to print thousands and thousands of Bibles to be handed out in the public schools. Does that sound like a government that was not supposed to have God in any of its means of progress or its relationship with the people? Absolutely not. They printed thousands of them for decades. Not just in the beginning, for decades. There's a reason why they've taken God out of your life, because they don't want you to be a sovereign, free people, spiritual, understanding people. They want you to be an ill, dependent, spiritually broken people. So the only place you think you have to turn to is them. And what are they doing with you? You are submitting to their agenda. Just as he's explaining to the president right here. Which will affect our security as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Folks, our security. Is he talking about the people again? Negative. He is talking about our agenda, our security. The bankers and the people who are orchestrating and playing along with them. The people that you're allowed to see on TV every day. The people who represent this insolvent corporation and don't really answer to you. They don't answer to you at all. All they got to do with you is keep you dumbed down, keep you apathetic, keep you entertained, and not look at the real questions. You know, I want to tell you how silly it is. The day that the Chinese yuan took over the euro as the second most used currency in the world, do you know what the media, what I call mainstream media, was talking about on TV? Is Santa, believing in a white Santa, racist? What was the true skin color of Santa? Everyone, they were all talking about it. And I just laughed. This morning on TV, one of their morning shows on the news, they were actually talking about how to properly hold a hamburger, because there was some big study done in Japan, the proper way to hold a hamburger while you're eating it. So, such important information. While at the same time, the announcement was underneath the pages somewhere that, yeah, the government says that unemployment is only at 6.8%. Well, anyone who knows the statistics understand that's a bald-faced lie. And how they do that is they do this because if you're not collecting unemployment benefits anymore, guess what? The insolvent corporation, you know, as the government, doesn't consider you unemployed anymore. It's not that you're not working. It doesn't mean that you're working, my friends. It just means that you ran out of benefits. You're not part of the equations. Well, there's millions of Americans that are like that right now. The true unemployment rate in this country right now, depending on who you pay attention to, but they're all in the same ballpark, is between 21 and 23%. The true unemployment rate. Not the people who ran out of benefits. So they're being a security, our security, the banker's security. This is what they're talking about. But listen to these words: as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. What is fiat paper currency? Fiat. Of no standing is what the word means. Of no standing. And when we talk about currency, it means it has no intrinsic value. You know what backs up this dollar? Besides at gunpoint with the world, the United States military telling every country that you will use this for your reserve currency to purchase oil or sell oil. Folks, that's why we've gone into all these countries, Iraq, Libya, and now we got agent provocateurs. We're in Mali, we're in Syria, we're in Yemen. This is why, because Gaddafi and Hussein and the rest of these guys decided, hey, you know what? It's not worth my country buying these debt instruments anymore because they're losing value. I could go to the euro, which it seems to be having more value, not anymore. I could go to the Chinese yuan, which has a lot more value and is being depreciated purposely by the Chinese. That's where they were going. And then you have the Gaddafis and the Husseins were actually going to create a currency, the Duma, based on the value of a barrel of oil. Think of that. That's the true reason. But they had to sell it to you. Just like freeing the black man in the Civil War, we got to sell it to you with 9/11, although supposedly all the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. Did you know that 9 of the 19 hijackers have been confirmed alive? Look it up. This is where we are. This is what he's talking about. So we became the security, their security, as a chargeback for our fiat paper currency. Again, there's that word our. Is it ours as in the people again? No, it's ours as in the bankers. Every American will be forced to register or suffer being unable to work and earn a living. Go ahead and you go get a job without that federal identification number you know is Social Security number. Go ahead. Go build a house on their property without registering to them so they can charge you a fee to build that building on their property, tell you how to do it, tell you that we're going to charge you to do it, and also we're going to have our people come and inspect it to make sure you're doing it under our terms. Oh, and by the way, you will pay for all our benevolent services that we provide to you. Because we're going to tell you to put in a septic system when they've been putting in septic systems in northern Vermont for years without any damage to the water tables and doing it properly. But they've got you believing that you got to go out and spend X amount of thousands of dollars for an engineer. If you don't do all this, my friends, you will be unable to work and earn a living. Can you say biological property once again? They will be our chattel. And I'll sum up the word chattel for you real easy. Chattel, movable property which has been liened. And you say, wait a minute, Tom, I haven't been liened, really? You got a birth certificate? That's your chargeback, my friends, is the birth certificate, backed by your ignorance and your sweat equity. There's actually a bond. Some years ago, I actually brought in a copy of my birth certificate with the bond from the Midwest Bank Note Company. I was born 11/10/58. I was bonded, literally bonded, on secured paper. Says it right down lower, on secured paper, 11/12/1958. So chattel, movable property. Can I move around? Yep, which has been liened. Have I been liened? Absolutely. I'm chattel. And we will hold the security interest over them forever. By operation of the law merchant. Ha ha. Back to the law. What was the mechanism they're going to do? Law merchant, my friends, commercial law. And this is why they changed, the corporation changed from common law, where the law basically left you alone unless you did harm to someone or their property, to law mercantile, or you know it as commercial law. Under the scheme of secured transactions. And I just mentioned that my birth certificate said what? And it was written on what? It was a bond by the Midwest Bank Note Company on security paper. Says it right on it. Americans, by unknowingly or unwillingly delivering the bills of lading. We went over this before. What is the bill of lading? That's the goods. That's the goods. What's the goods? Your biological property and everything else that you perceive that you think you own. The bills of lading to us, again, is it to the people? No, it's to the bankers, and will render them bankrupt and insolvent. Well, if you're working for a debt instrument and you're bonded in a commercial law system, my friends, you're a debtor. You are bankrupt and you are insolvent. Hence the reason why you do not own anything. Hence the reason why you must register what you perceive to be your property to the corporation. Forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. Forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. My friends, this is why we do this show. Because the future of our nation, the future of our people, and the future of most of what you perceive to be the free world its future lies right here in this statement. Forever to remain economic slaves. What is a slave? Years and years ago, we took out our Black's Law Dictionary and we looked up freeman and we looked up slave. And it's very, very simple. A freeman acts with his own dictates. A slave acts with the dictates of another. Very, very simple. Do you think you're free? Do a free people bond their children? Do a free people own property? Do a free people have intrinsic value in their money, or does a free people have a debt instrument that they have to pay an interest on, like serfs? Which one are we? Does a free people travel freely, or are they licensed and pays fines and fees to register to support the corporation? So where are we in our standing of freedom and slavery? Because to me, when I look up the language, we are economic slaves. We work hard. I was speaking to a good friend of mine this morning. He's working 4 jobs. He is not an uneducated man. He's an educated person. He is very good at what he does. He works 4 jobs. 4. That's the American dream? No. Is that the life that so much sacrifice has been made for, so that my friend, who is a very educated man, has to work 4 jobs and is paying anywhere between 62 and 66% of his sweat equity to the insolvent corporations, all the alphabet suits at the federal, local, and state levels? Is that a free man? Is a free man that what little is left for him, he has to pay an interest bond due on every one of them debt instruments that's in his pocket? Is that a free man? You actually got to pay for the scrapings that are left for you? That's not a free man. We are not a free people. And it is done through what Mr. House is speaking of right here. Forever to remain economic slaves through taxation secured by their pledges. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit. So you don't have rights, my friend. What you have are privileges, and privileges are granted by a superior. Rights are unalienable, not unalienable, like they come from Mars, unalienable. They're from God. You are born with them as a human being. Privileges are granted. Privileges are altered. Privileges can be taken away and or altered by the grantor, and that is the corporation, because that's who you look to for your rights. And you know them as civil rights. And this goes back to the 14th American citizen. 14th Amendment American citizen. They will be stripped of their rights and given a commercial value designed to make us a profit that will be, they will be none the wiser, for not 1 in a million could ever figure out our plans. And if by accident 1 or 2 should figure it out, we will have in our arsenal plausible deniability. So we're not the wiser. I think a lot of us have figured it out. When a person of my humble education, just because I made the effort, because I asked questions and didn't like the answers I was getting, and was vigilant and diligent in what my studying was, if a person of my humble education level can figure it out, my friends, all of you can. I don't know all the answers, but I know enough that I'm not liking what I'm seeing. And I know enough that what history dictates is going to happen to us as a people if we don't make changes. And just think, this is the same corporation, my friends, that's raping you, that's bonded your children, that has taken all the intrinsic value out of your money, that is indoctrinating your kids, that is poisoning the population, literally. This is the same corporation that wants to take away your guns. Even though we supposedly have this terrible terrorist threat, and the borders are wide open, though, the southern border. And they'll have our arsenal of plausible deniability. After all, this is the only logical way to fund government, by floating liens and debt to the registrants in the form of benefits and privileges. So what they've done is they've made you a commercial entity. They've put a bond against you with that commercial entity. They've taken any intrinsic wealth, your property, your gold, your silver, anything, your car, and you register, and then that title is held by this insolvent corporation. They float liens and debts on it to the registrants. Folks, who's the people doing the registering? You and I. And what's their return? We take away your rights and bring to you forth benefits and privileges, which, by the way, we can alter and or take away at any time. This will inevitably reap to us, huge profits beyond our wildest expectations, and leave every American a contributor to this fraud, which we will call social insurance. Without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur, and in this manner, every American will unknowingly be our servant, however begrudgingly. The people will become helpless and without any hope for their redemption, and we will employ the high office of the president of our dummy corporation to foment this plot against America. We'll leave every American a contributor to this fraud. Are you contributing to this fraud every single moment of every day? Yes, we are, as a people. And how do we do that, you say? Well, your sweat equity right now is, like I said, between 62 and 64% just in taxes. Never mind the cost of business to take care of all these alphabet agencies that gets put on your product that you purchase. Never mind that what you think is a dollar is not a dollar. It's a private debt script of a private for-profit banking corporation. And by you using it and not standing up to it, you contribute to it. And by you contribute to it, they keep it going. You have children, you sign the birth certificate. There floats another bond. And who's the lien on your child? This is what he is talking about. And this fraud, listen to his language, fraud. We will call this social insurance. And without realizing it, every American will insure us for any loss we may incur. Can you imagine? The bankers made trillions of dollars on the way up, and they made billions and trillions of dollars on the way down. And how they do that? Because you paid for it on the way up. And then when it was all crashing, which they knew they would, what'd they do? They had their subservient corporation come in and as a chargeback to the subservient corporation's property. And what or who do you think that property is? You and I. You and I. This President Obama or Barry Soetoro is not answering to the people of the United States. He's answering to the creditors. Who's the creditors? The Federal Reserve Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. Those are the creditors. Of course, he's making, I'm sure, plenty under the table. After all, as we talked about, his children, his two daughters are receiving pensions and pay. I forget what the figures were. That was some time ago that we did that. But they're doing just fine, my friends. And do you really know who this guy is? I mean, basic questions have never been answered. And yes, I know some of you that, you know, the people, the Democrats or the people on the far left, listen, and the far right, there's one thing you got to do. And I've said this before. You have got to get outside that dividing paradigm. You know the old saying, divide and conquer? That's just not makeup. That's methodology. Methodology. And they divide us every way they can. The left, the right, you're pro-life, pro-choice, whatever. The division is everywhere. Whether it's racial, education, economic, whatever, it's everywhere. So they divide us. And they got us thinking in terms of left and right. Well, my friends, you better wake up, and I've said this before, you better start thinking in terms of up and down, because that's what we are at. That's where we are. We're at the pinnacle of that peak. And we're either going to come back to where we belong, or we are coming in for a deep slide. And what are they going to do? The people will become helpless. Is that not the feeling of the average American? I know people that watch this show, and you know what they say to me? Tom, I appreciate your effort, but there's nothing we can do, and all it does is frustrate me. Well, you know, that is a defeatist attitude. And you know what? If you keep that attitude, you will be defeated. We as a nation will crumble. We as a people will be conquered. If you do not make the effort to educate yourselves, your neighbors, your friends, your family, my friends, we can still acquire redemption. There are still avenues out there for us to participate in and take use of successfully. But we cannot do it being an ignorant people. This is what this show is about. We have got to understand where we are, the hows, the whys, the means, and that there is an agenda. There is a conspiracy. You know, if I say the word conspiracy, what's the first word that comes up in your mind? Theory? Like it's something not proven? And why does that word come to your mind? Because you've been conditioned to believe that. If I say conspiracy, first word, theory. You've been conditioned to believe that. Listen to Mandel House, hour. He mentions the word hour 5 times and us twice. And they, being you and I, at least 4 or 5 times. People will become hapless without any hope of redemption, and we will employ the high office of president of our dummy corporation. Well, that to foment this plot against America. Well, my friends, that dummy corporation is now insolvent. And you, as its property, have been liened. You have been bonded. As he said, this is the best way to fund government, by floating liens and bonds to the registrants. You and I are the registrants. This is one simple statement, but I think it really sums up very well where we are. Now, second statement I wanted to cover. And obviously I'm not going to have the time I desire. John Maynard Keynes. He is also known as the father of Keynesian economics. And this is from his book, The Economic Consequence of the Peace. Now think about this. Of the peace. The consequence of peace. Have you noticed, my friends, how we are always at war? Now, of course, we haven't declared war since December 8th, 1941, but that no longer matters. We send our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters, our uncles and aunts, our cousins, nieces and nephews. We send them to bleed for the profit of corporations because another corporation called the United Nations said we got to do this. Or they sold this whole facade to you about 9/11. Or whatever it may be. We got to free the black people. Whatever it may be. So what he's talking about here, Mr. Keynes, is that he's talking about the consequence of peace. Now, to me, that makes absolute no sense, because the whole goal of our government is supposed to be to secure our liberties and have the people in tranquil peace. All this banker-run corporation has done is bleed us physically and economically, spiritually and intellectually. We're a bled people. Do you remember that document we had, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars? We will get the American people down at high school graduation down to a 6th grade reading level. We will take away all reasoning processes. Have they done that? Absolutely. Kids can't even count change back today if the machine ain't doing it for them. Never mind contemplate the perspective and scope of what's going on in their lives. So Mr. Keynes is talking about how can they, because he's going to use the words us and our again. And he's also going to say this is outside of Mr. House, he's also going to say that not 1 in a million was going to be able to diagnose this. Where did we just hear that? You see, my friends, they know they control your information. They know they control your education. They know they control your religions through 501c3 churches. So they can bank, if you would, on your ignorance. The consequence, economic consequence of peace, page 235. Mr. John Maynard Keynes. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch its currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and it does so in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. A continuing process of inflation. How do you create inflation? You debauch the currency. You devalue the currency. You take away the gold and silver. You take away the faith of it. You take away any intrinsic backing of it. This is why when I was a child, a candy bar was a nickel to a 5 cents to 10 cents, where today it's $1 to $2. The candy bar hasn't changed, my friends. It's the value of that medium of exchange that's changed. And it's been devalued. That's what inflation is. And governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. Folks, their means possession. Possession. Their citizens. There is no suppler and no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a society than to debauch its currency. This isn't just about economic control, my friends. This is about control of every aspect of what the word means. We have got to have this understanding. Our nation is in peril. Our way of life has already been debauched and is failing at a tremendous rate. And my fear is that if we do not put a stop to these processes that these two gentlemen so openly and blatantly and on the record speak of, this agenda against us, the people, then I'm afraid, I'm in fear of where we will be as a people. We don't own anything. We have no possessions. We have no intrinsic value. Our sweat equity is for a debt instrument of a private banking corporation. We have no representative government. We've lost that. Maybe not so much at the local level, but at the federal level, the whole thing's corrupted. Completely corrupted. My friends, we need to wake up as a people. We need to ask questions. And no matter where the truth takes us, we have to act upon that truth. We are in trouble. Please study history. Understand what happens to a people or a nation who put themselves or allow this process to be placed against them. And now they've wanted your guns for a long time. Even though we have this terrorist threat. My friends, if we had a real terrorist threat, if there was a terrorist behind every wall, behind every corner, and I cared about my people, I'd want them armed to protect themselves from this perceived threat. But this government, this insolvent corporation, answering to the superior solvent corporation, wants your only means of protection against these two agendas. And I hope it never comes down to that. That's why we take the risk of what we do and produce this program. The people in front of the camera and the people behind the camera. And I would like to thank them all for having the courage, the knowledge, the understanding, the diligence to proceed with this even though we do it under duress. I'd like to thank Bill Flick for filming, setting in when I can't. Bill does a wonderful job, very knowledgeable, extremely knowledgeable. And I want to thank you for watching this program. And I'm not just talking horse hockey, I mean it. We are in trouble, folks. We need to turn this around. We need to educate ourselves and our fellow man because we can do this through education. I fear that I hope it never comes to guns, but if it does, my friends, think of what's going on. What Sun Tzu say, the battle is over before it's began. People say, oh, well, you know, there was a thing on the internet one time about, you know, hundreds of thousands of deer hunters in Wisconsin makes an army. My friends, people who own guns, that doesn't make an army. And I will tell you right now, bullets are not our best ammo. Our best ammo is education. Education is our best ammo. And you should be reaching out to your clergy. You should be reaching out to the law enforcement. You know, my job takes me into communications with a lot of law enforcement. And I will tell you, my friends, most of them, the vast, vast majority of them, are very good-hearted people who really believe they're serving their man. I know some of you may find that hard to believe, and I know there are some of them that are over there for other reasons. But I will tell you, you have to reach out to these people. These people are our friends, and believe it or not, they need us. Look what's going on with the sheriff's departments in this country. I was going to get into a story here about the chief of police, basically in Yemez Springs, New Mexico. I don't have time. He went to a constitutional convention. He's the chief of police in this city. And the feds actually harassed him. They held him at bay. I'm sorry I didn't get to that. I will next program. My friends, we are all in this together. But the answer is not to take the arms and create bloodshed. The answer is education. And I think, you know, the more that you find out, the more you understand what John Adams and Samuel Adams both spoke about, and George Mason so well, about the exhilarating quest of liberty. There's nothing more exciting going on than the situation that we are in as a people. And I truly thank you for watching this program. And with that, my friends, we close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between